Good morning, student. How's everyone doing? Anyone have any questions? All right. Just a reminder, we're getting close to the end of the semester, and you're going to have a final exam coming soon. I think the final exam, I want to go ahead and open it for probably the week of the final exam. So we're not gonna have, you don't have to come and take it at a certain time of the week. So the way I'll do it is I'll set it up. I don't know how it is right now on the syllabus, but I will change that so you can take it like you take any of the other exams. So they'll have like about a week period, the final week period. This is what you have to take it in. So so I'm gonna change that. Right now it is set to be taking on Wednesday, June 3rd. I will make it available from Tuesday, June 2nd. Till the end of that week, so I'll be available to this thing. So so I will do that. So anyway, just to let you know. But this is 2 weeks from today, June 3rd. This is how close it is. So in less than 2 weeks we'll be done. So we have today's lecture, and Monday is a holiday, so we don't have a lecture on Monday. We have a lecture on Wednesday. But we do have a lecture on June 1st. So June 1st is a lecture. So what I may do is I may do a recording on May 25, and this way, because I know June 1st is cutting it too close to the final exam, because on June 2nd is the final exam when it starts. So I may do a recording on May 25. So this way we can finish next week. So anyway, I'll keep you updated about that. Anyone have any question regarding any exam or anything? All right. Are you all taking the exams by the due dates? Everything is on Canvas. Make sure you take all the exam, all the assessment by the due date. All right. On Monday, we started talking about chapter 5. We talked basically about list boxes. And list boxes are going to become important for chapter 5, because in chapter 5, we have to repeat things multiple times. For example, so far up to chapter 4, we've been doing things for only one item. For example, computing the gross pay for one person, right? But what if you want to compute the gross pay for 10 people or 20 people or 30 people? How are you going to display that? You cannot display it in a text box because you're going to need more space. In this case, list box allow you to do that, because you can have a collection stored in a list box. Like in here, you have a collection that's stored the year. So you have 5 years in here listed, and you can have a collection to store the months, and you have 12 months listed in here. And you can have as many items as you want in that list box. So a key element of the list box is a property called items, which is a collection. Basically, it's a group of items. That's how you can think of collection. It can store more than one value. We call it a collection. All right, and you reference a different item that belong to the collection using an index. So the first item in the collection will be called item 0. The second item will be item 1, etc. So you start from item 0 instead of item 1. And we talk about basically when you run it, you can select a specific item, and then you can identify the item you selected by using some properties that are available to list boxes. And one of the property is called selected index, right? So if I select, for example, 2014, the selected index is not 2, but it's 1, because 2012 is at index 0. Always the first item is at index 0. Second item is index 1. So this is at index 1. And if I select December, this is not index 12, but index 11. So always you go from 0 to the size, the number of items minus 1. So you go to that. This is basically the collection. So there's two property. One property called selected index that tell you what you selected. Another property is called selected item. So if you do any of that, selected item or selected index, it will give you what you're selecting. So let's go and look at the code window to see how we coded that. We coded that by using the selected item property. So basically in here, I want to display on the status bar whatever months I selected. So I use the list name for the months list, LST months. Convention is to use LST prefix for list boxes. So LST months, that selected item. So in this case, what this gives me, December. This is selected months. So it's going to give me December. And I have to convert it to string. Then I say LST year, the selected item is going to give you 2014. I combine them together with a space between them. This is a concatenation operator, so it combines them. So you put in here the months, space, the year, right? So when I click on OK, it's going to say December 2014 on the status bar, which is what I'm getting in here, right? One problem with that is that what if I don't select an item, right? If I run it again and I don't select an item, right? There's an issue in here because you're going to try to say display selected months, but there's no month selected, and concatenate that with a selected year, and there's no year selected. So it's going to blow up in production. This is called a runtime error. It's going to create a runtime error, and there's no try catch block to catch this error. So it's gonna throw it and it's gonna terminate. And this is what you don't want as a programmer. You don't want your program to terminate. Okay, like this one here, tell you in here exception thrown. Right. If I put it in a try catch block, the catch block would have handled it, but I didn't put it there, so I get an exception. Now there's different way you can handle the exception. Right. One way you can handle it is you can use a try catch block. Right. So in this case, if I want, I can put that in a try block, and in the catch block, I can put an error message, right? So if I want, one way I can do it, I can put in here try, and select this one. And you can see that try catch block is not just only to handle non-numeric entry. You can use it also to handle that you forgot to select an item for a list from a list box. So in here I can do message box like we did before. And I can, if I want to say, please select, make sure to select a month and a year, which is probably the better message to put. But because there are many exceptions that may be thrown, maybe you enter non-numeric value and you try to convert it to an integer, or maybe you forget to select an item from list book, or maybe many other things, right? Because there's too many possibilities, you can, if you want, put a display in here, error occurred and then you can put in here the error message. And now the question is, how do you know what the error message is? You can use a concatenate operator with that and use the exception variable, EX in this case, and then say dot message. And this will display the error message, what happened, right? And you may want to put that to string probably. I don't think you need to, because it is by default, it is a string, I think. But let's go ahead and put it. Right, so basically, if I run it right now, and if I don't select any item, all right, and say okay, it's gonna, it's still gonna throw it still gonna terminate. Okay, all right. So a better way to do that actually, and actually the only way to do it now is to use an if statement. So let's forget about the try catch block. I want to take this one out and put it the way it was. A better way to check for that is to use an if statement and check if there was no item selected. So so we can check if there is no item selected LST months dot selected index. This will tell you basically which item you selected. So if you selected, for example, January, is going to give you 0. If you select February, it's going to give you 1. You start at 0, index 0. But if you don't select anything, it's going to give you -1. So we can say if selected index is not equal to -1, that means you haven't selected, you have selected something, right? Right. Or you can just say in here if it is equal to -1. Or let's say not equal to -1. So if it is not equal to -1, then you can check if the year, let's see year in the selected index is not equal to -1. So if both the year and the months are not -1, that means you have selected a year and you have selected selected a year and you have selected a month. So otherwise, we do else in here. So if you haven't selected a year, we display an error message. Okay, we can display it on the status bar, I guess. Please select a year. And this one, LBL status, please select a month. So you can do something like that. All right. Very important whenever you're using status bar to display information. The first thing you want to do when you enter the function at the beginning, you want to clear the status bar. By basically setting LBL status dot text, setting that to an empty string. Just always clear it at the beginning. Otherwise, you may still get the error message the next time you come around. This is not going to happen in this case because you're displaying the result on the status bar. But if you run it in here, and let's say we're not going to select a month. So if you don't select a month and say, okay, it's gonna, the first if statement, right? The first statement is gonna return -1. So it's gonna go to, I forget to put else in here. So the first if statement is gonna fail, is gonna throw it to the else. We're gonna display select a month. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop running this program and then run it again. So if you don't select a month, okay, this if statement is gonna fail. Because it's gonna fail, it's gonna throw it to the else, where it's gonna display, please select the month. So it's gonna say in here, please select the month. All right, so let's go ahead and select the month. All right, and then click on OK. What's gonna happen, the first one is not gonna fail because you selected the months. Selected index for months is 0, January is 0. So it's gonna go to the next if statement. You're gonna try to see if you selected a year, and I'm not gonna select a year because I haven't selected a year. It's going to throw it to the inner else block to say, please select the year. I say, please select the year. Now, if I select a year, then the first select index is going to equal to, for the month is going to equal to 0. The selected index for the year is going to equal to 2. Remember, you start at 0, 0, 1, 2. So it's not going to fail. It's going to display the months and the year. It's going to say January 2016. So it does work, right? So I'm going to go ahead and close this one. And basically, these are two important properties of the list boxes. Selected index to tell you which index you selected, -1 if you hadn't selected anything, and selected item, which tell you which item you selected, December or 2014 or wherever have you. So that would tell you, all right? Now, in addition to that, there's other property, right? You can go to the property windows. And you can, if you want, select a list and then go to the properties, the solution explorer. Let's hide this one. I want to view the property window. So if you don't see the property window for some reason, just go to toolbars, to windows, other windows, and select properties window or the function key F4. We're going to display it. There is a property called sorted property. Okay, if you look for it, but be careful. You don't want to change that to true in the design mode. If you do it in design mode, it's going to rearrange the number to list them alphabetically, and you won't be able to get them in the order they had them originally. So if I do it in design mode right now, sorted, they're going to list them alphabetically, and you're not going to be able to get them in the order that listed. But if you do it in the code window, then you still will be able to get it. So for example, if I want to, which you don't want to do, but let's say I want to sort the months, I want to sort that alphabetically. I can do lst months dot items that's sorted. Actually, that's sorted. And then you say equal to true. If you say equal to true, it's going to sort them alphabetically. If you say equal false, it's not going to sort it. So if you do that, it's going to sort the list alphabetically. I don't know why you want to do that, but it's going to sort the months alphabetically. So, okay, I want to say okay. Let's go ahead and select any item here. You can see now the list is sorted alphabetically. So you have April before August, and you have December, February. Okay, so it gives you that, all right? So, but if you close this application and run it again, you're going to get it in the normal order now. It's back to normal order, right? So if you do it in the code window, it's fine. You can get it back. But if you do it in the design window, if you go to design window and change the sorted property, change it to true, then you're not going to be able to get the monsters in the right order anymore. So be careful of that. Let's go talk about some more properties available to the list boxes. And here we're going to get to loops because this is the main important thing of chapter 5. But we need to know also list boxes because we're going to be using them in our code. So the sort probably allow you to sort it. If you set it to true, it's going to sort them alphabetically. If you set it to false, it will not sort them. It's set to false by default. You can, if you like, add item to the list, right? By saying ls list box items that add. The item will be added to the bottom of the list always, all right? So if I want, for example, I can add 2022, all right? So to do that, I'm gonna go do it in the code window. I can say lst year dot items dot add, and I can say in here 2022. All right, so I can add that. Always it added to the end of the list. So when you add an item, add it to the end of the list. So when you run it, it's gonna 2022 is gonna be added at the end of the list. So right now you have 2020. When let's select any item here. Say, okay, we have 2022 added. Right? If I select another thing, right, again, it's going to add another 2022. So it adds to the end of the list, right? So keep that in mind. If I say again, it's going to add a scroll bar because now you have 3 2022 added. I'll close that. So you add an item by using item.add. You can, if you want, add an item between two items by using an index, right? So if you want to add an item as the third item, you can use an index 2 because index 2 is the third item. So it's going to add Gene at 2002. Let's look at this example. Let's say I want to add an item 2015 between 2014 and 2016. Now, we want to add it at 2016, which is at index 2. The third item is index 2. So when I insert it at index 2. So we can say LST year dot items dot insert. I can say the item I want to insert, which is 2015. Notice IntelliSense, it gives you a hint. You have the index before the object. So I made an error in here. So you have to put the 2 before the 2015. So you're going to put in here, I want to insert it as item 3 at index 2. I want to insert 2015. So I'm going to insert it as item number 3, the year 2015. So if I run that, it's going to basically add 2015 to the list. Let's select in here, it doesn't matter. Select 2018. Say add. Notice 2015 was added between 2014 and 2016. So you can do that. You can remove an item at a specific index. So if you want to delete a specific item, you specify the index you want to. For example, if you say in here, LSC student items that remove at 2, is going to remove the third item. Right. Now, you can, if you want, remove a specific value. So you can say remove gene. It's going to remove gene, a specific value. Now it's going to remove only the first one, not all of them. So be careful. If you have 2 genes, for example, it's not going to remove them. Let me go ahead and illustrate that. So I'm going to go ahead and add in here 2020 twice. So when I go to item collections, or the items collection, here it is, it's a collection. I want to add in here another 2020. Right, actually a couple of them. So we have 3 of them now. So it's being duplicated now. So we have 2023 time. Let's say I want to remove that. I can use in here LSC year dot item dot remove, not remove, add remove, and let's say in here 2020. Right. It's going to remove only the first occurrence, not all of them, only one. So let's verify that. So it doesn't matter which year I select. Say okay. Here it is going to give you in here. It deleted only one 2020. You still have 2 of them are left. So delete only the first one. So keep that in mind. If you want to clear everything, if you want to delete all the item, you can say item clear. It's going to remove all the item. So these are items to remove thing. Right, these are a summary of the methods available for listbox. You can add an item using the add. You can delete all the item using the clear method. There's some of them we didn't use. They contain. It will return true if the value you're listing as parameter is in the list. For example, you can say if it contain January, then if the list have January, it's going to give you true. Count to tell you how many items in the list. So for months, you're going to have a 12 item. Count will be 12. the index of is going to return the object. Where is it located in the list? Insert, we use that to allow you to insert an item at a specific index. Item is allow you to pick up one specific item. So if you say item or item 1, is going to return the second item in the list. Remove and remove add, we talked about that. So these are some of them. This is reference. You don't really need to memorize them. You can have the book and you can get to it, right? So, but need to know them for multiple choice exam, because if you get asked on the exam, make sure that you have reference quickly so you can answer the multiple choice questions. Right now we're ready to talk about loops, all right? And a loop is a structure that is used to repeat tasks, all right? And we're going to talk about some essential structure. I'm going to go ahead and use a projector to do that. And very important thing that we're going to be doing in this class. And you have what we call a counting loop. This is a common thing you do in loops. You count. You see, basically, for example, you want to compute the average of 10 students. You have to repeat the task 10 times, right? So you do create a counting loop. Anytime, as the name imply, anytime you have a counting loop, you have to declare an integer for the counter. I'm going to call it in here end count. You do need that. Declare an integer for the counter, right? Then you would you need to do 3 things to set up a counting loop. The first thing you need to do, you have to initialize the counter. And usually you initialize it to 0 or 1. Most of the time people prefer to initialize it to 0. The reason is simple, because if you remember the index for list boxes, they start at index 0. So you want to have a corresponding with the index of a list box, because you have to reference it. So that's why you start usually with zeros, right? Then you would have a while loop. They call it do while, I think. C++, they call it, they use while. So you say do while, and you would use the counter while end count less than the number of items. So let's say in here, let's create in here a constant. And it's an integer. Let's call it final count. Let's say I want to count 5 times. Right? So you go from 0 while end count is less than the final count. It means less than 5. So in this case, what this is saying is I want to repeat the loop 5 times. That's all what it's saying. So if you want to repeat it 10 times, you change the 5 to 10, right? This will tell you how many times you want to execute the loop. I want to execute it 5 times. This one, you set the count to 0, and you repeat until end count is equal to final count. When it reaches 5, it stops. And you can do different thing in here. Maybe you can put in here message box. And you can say show hello. And then you will say end count. You add 1 to the counter, you increment the counter. And then you would say in here, loop or end while. I forgot the syntax. But a counting loop has 3 important elements, right? Every counting loop need to have 3 elements. You have to initialize the count. First thing you need to do, you need to initialize. You need to initialize the count. Usually initialize it to 0. Second, you need to test the count. You need to test the counter, right, to see if it reached the final value. And third thing, you need to update the counter. So any counting loop need to have these three elements. If you don't put these three elements, you're gonna have issues. You're gonna have problem with it. So always remember when you're creating counting loop, and most of the problem you're doing with loop problem is gonna be counting problem. You have to initialize the count before the loop starts. This is a loop basically. This is what's repeating, right? You initialize it before the loop and then you test it. Here's an example. Let me show you what we do. Usually you do tracing table with this one. Tracing tables, you say in here, you declare, you show what your variable contains. So you have count in here. You create a table. What's the value of int count? Initially int count is set to 0, right? You check the condition. Is the condition int count less than int final value? Right? This is a true or false. And then you would have the output maybe. All right. So let's go ahead and check this one. And let's make this one, yeah, just keep it 5, fine. So you start, int count is equal to 0 initially. You test the condition, is int count less int final, right? It is, right? Because int final is 5, 0 is less than 5, this is true. Since it is true, it goes into the loop, right? So it goes into the loop, right? And it display hello. So the output is hello in here. And then it increment the count. It add 1 to the count. So count is 0 plus 1 is going to become 1. Then it goes again. It goes again to test the condition. Is int count less int val? All right. Int count is 1. It is less than 5. Still, it is true. Because it's true, you fall into the loop again, and you say hello another time, right? And increment the count another time. The count is going to become 2 because 1 plus 1 is 2, right? And then it goes test the count again, right? 2 is still less than 5. It's going to fall again into the loop, display hello a third time, right? Increment the count. So 2 plus 1 is 3 now. Go back to test the condition. So 3 is less than 5. This is true. Go another time into the loop, display hello. Increment the count. It's 4 now. Test the condition again. 4 is less than 5. This is true. So because true is going to fall and display hello again. Increment the count for the final time. So 4 plus 1 is 5. Go and test the condition. Now, the condition is false because 5 is not less than 5. 5 is equal to 5. So this is false. Because the condition is false, you would exit the loop. The loop terminates. So notice in here what happened. We executed the loop 5 times because we had hello displayed 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we execute 5 times. So basically, if you want to execute it 10 times, you can change the 5 to 10, and this tell you how many times you're going to repeat the loop. And this is essential when you create loops because you need to know how many times you need to repeat the code. For example, if you're computing the average salaries of 5 employees, you have to repeat the loop 5 times and get the salary of each employee and do that. Right. This is essential, very basic stuff. You need to understand it. This is a if you like, you can call it a template that you use to create counting loop, right? So everybody should be able to write a loop to do things, repeat things so many number of times, 5 times or 10 times. You use this structure. You just change the final value to whatever, how many number of times you want the loop to repeat, and then you'll have that. Now, what you can do in the loop can be as simple as displaying a message such as hello, or as complex as asking the user to enter the hours worked for the employee and the hourly pay rate, and compute the gross pay and compute the net pay, and then display a paycheck and do all of that for each employee. All right. So it can be as simple as one line, or it can be as big as several lines to do complex operation. But the idea is, if you have 5 employees, you need to have this counting loop to repeat 5 times, right? So the structure is the same, the content is a little bit the same, which can bring us to the other question, is how do we compute the average? Because we get to the question in here, how do we compute the average? And the way you do that is we're going to talk about a running total problem. And I will start on a new page. So I'll say in here, running total form. These are essential things like template you need to know. So the other thing you need to know is running total loop. Running total loop is used to compute totals and to compute averages, all right? To do that, you need to have always you need to have a counter, because it's a counting problem, so you need to have a counter. You're going to create end count as integer. Counters always are integer, all right? Because you count with whole number, right? In addition to that, you're going to be accumulating total. What do we mean by accumulating? You're going to be adding total. Like, for example, what is the total salaries made by all 5 employees? You have to add the salary of the first employee to the salary of the second employee to the salary of the third employee, add them all up to get the total. So you need a variable that we call an accumulator. An accumulator can be called something like int sum or int total. Either one is fine. You can call it in total if you like, right? So you can call it in total, or you can call it in sum. Either way is fine. It's indicating that you're computing totals in here, and you can give it. This is gonna be, it can be either double or integer depending on what you're totaling. If you're totaling money, it has to be double. If you're totaling how many items you have in the inventory, it has to be integer. To be in the safe side, it's a good idea to declare it as double. So it can work because double is a superset of integers. So it will work with integer too. So we're going to declare it as double. So we have total, right? You're going to be reading the values. You're going to be reading these salaries, right? So if you're going to total 5 salaries, you have to read 5 salaries, right? We need a variable for that. I'm going to call this one. We're going to call it in here. This is DBL. Sorry, it should be DBL. So double. This is DBL total. This is DBL. Let's say you can call it DBL salary if you're doing salary, but we're not doing salary right now. We're doing a general template that can be used for any problem. So I'm going to call it in here value, DBL value. DBL val, right? It's a value. It can be salary, it can be grade, it can be temperature, it can be anything you like. It's a general problem. So when I call it val, let's call it value. A value that you're gonna read as double, of course. Right? You may want to check how many items you want to total, right? So you want to ask them, all right, how many customers do we have? How many employee we gonna compute the average salary for, right? So me want to probably declare in here another variable called int number of item, or maybe I should call it items. Well, let's say number items. This is integer, whole number. Right. So at the beginning, we ask the user how many items we have, right? And then we read that, right? What else we need? If you're computing the average, right, this is optional, depending if you're doing total or average. So if you're doing the average, you would need that. If you're not doing the average, you don't need that. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that in brackets. This is optional. So if you're doing the average, you need to declare a variable for it. This is DBL. Average always gonna be a double. Right. If it asks you, the problem asks you for totals, you don't need that variable. But if it asks you for the average, you do need that. I think this is about it. I may have forgot some other variable. If I remember, if I need to, I'll add them later on. So I leave little space. So always the first thing you want to do, right? You need to initialize the total. As before, you initialize the count. So we can say in here, you need to initialize the count to 0. It's still a counting problem. You need to initialize it to 0. But before we do that, let's get how many values we have. So I want to get in here, I want to prompt the user number of item. Now we learned on Monday to use a pop-up window similar to message box called input box. And we said what input box does, it prompts the user for display a pop-up window with a message. For example, I can display the message number of items. So it asks the user to enter the number of items, right? So you're gonna get a window. And inside the window is gonna say number of items. As for number of item, it's gonna allow you to enter the number of item in the box. So you can enter maybe, okay, I have 5 items. So you enter 5 items. Now what you enter in here, the 5 you enter in here is a text. Okay, it's not a number, all right? So you still need to convert whatever the user enter, because that's what input box is gonna return. It's gonna return whatever the user entered, for example, 5. But it's gonna return it as a string. You need to convert that to an integer. So you use the CINT function. Similar to use a CINT function when we converted what you enter in a text box, right? We use CINT txt control name dot text, right? And then convert it to an integer. Same thing, we can do that. And you probably want to put that in a try catch block, but we don't have time for that. I'm not putting the try catch block. So we have that. So we're gonna get this number of item. After that, we have to initialize the count. Because we have a counting loop, we initialize it to 0. We need also to initialize the accumulator, the total. You're gonna total the salaries or grades or whatever you're totaling, in this case values we're totaling. You initialize that to 0. Right, you put that in a loop, right? It's still a counting loop, so you need to have the counter, which initializes to 0. You're still gonna have the do while loop. This is from the previous thing we did, do while. Again, is going to be int count less than, but now it's going to go all the way to the number of item, int number of item. So while it is now less than number of items, now we're going to do the processing. Right. Let's look at the comparison. I want to emphasize that we're still talking about the counting loop. All right. So in here you have this is step 1, right? Initialize, right? This is step 2. Test. We still have a counting loop. Right. So we still have a counting loop, right? Right. It is same as this one, right? Where you had the initialize, the test, and at the end, before loop, we're gonna have update, right? So you're gonna have the 3-step. But now instead of just doing message box like hello, We can do lots of stuff now. It's not just doing saying hello, we're computing averages, we're doing running total. So you can do more stuff in here. So let's see what we're gonna do in here inside the loop. Inside the loop, what we're gonna do is we're gonna first ask for the next value, right? So let's say I wanna average, the number 50, 60, 70, and 80. I wanna average these numbers, right? So I need to get this number, I need to get the 50, right? I need to read that. How do I read that? You're gonna use the input box. This is how we're gonna get it, right? And where are we gonna get it? We're gonna get it into the DBL value. So we're gonna do that. So let's go ahead and do that. DBL val or DBL value. And we're gonna say in here, we're gonna use an input box, all right? And we're gonna prompt in here, next value. I don't know what are we totaling. Maybe we're totaling salary, maybe we're totaling grades, maybe we're totaling bananas, whatever we're totaling, all right? It doesn't matter. It's the same problem, all right? So we're totaling saying, enter the next value, maybe next salary, or the next grade, the student's next grade, or whatever you're totaling. So we do that. Now this one gonna be double, right? DBL value is double. So we have to use CDBL to convert it to double. Like when you use with text boxes, when we convert what we enter in text boxes to numbers. So we say CDBL double to go convert it. And this is gonna put in DBL values. Once you get that, so it's gonna give us the 50. And give us the 50 and convert that to a text. So I give you the number 50. We're gonna add it to the total. So we say in here, DBL total plus equal, add it to the total, that's called DBL value. So read the number 50, add it to the total. Initially, the total was 0, right? So you read 50, add it to the total, 0 plus 50 is gonna give you 50, right? And the next time around is gonna go the next value. You're gonna read the 60, add it to the total, but the total will have 50, so it's gonna give you 110. And it keep on going to accumulate the total. So this is what you're doing in here. The only thing you need to do is still have, don't forget, it's a counting loop. It's still a counting loop. So if you look about the 3 elements of a counting loop, you do initialize, you do test, and you do update. So we need to do an update at the end of the loop. So this is what's missing at the end. So we need to add that, and then we can go for the next value. So in here, when I say in here, end count, plus equal 1. And then we're going to say loop, right? And this is our loop. Again, this is the third element, the third step of a loop. You still have a counting loop, so you need to have initialize, test, and update. You still have these 3 elements, right? And this is your loop. So it's going to repeat that till it total all the grades that the user enter, or grades, or rainfall, or salaries, or whatever you're totaling, right? When you exit the loop, you have the total, and you'll be done. If you're computing total, you're done. But if you're computing average, you still have to do one thing. So after the loop, this is optional, depending if you're doing average. If you're not doing average, you don't have to do this step. But if you're doing average, you can say DBL average, all right, is equal, the average is equal to the total divided by the count. So it's equal to DBL total divided by DBL count, INT count, my mistake. INT, number of items. Number items. So you divide that by the number of items, and this gives you the average. Now this is optional if you want to compute the average. If you're computing the total only, then you don't do that. And this one is known as a running total problem. This is how you compute total. It's a very common problem in computer science. You use it a lot. You need to know that by heart. I mean, for COSCI 103, probably, it's not that, um, probably you can manage without knowing it by heart. But if you're gonna go into computer science major and you're gonna take more computer science classes, you should know that by heart. That basically, if I tell you compute the average, just say, oh, it's a piece of cake. You should know it by heart, that you can write it, because it's the same problem. Whether you're averaging grades or rainfall or salaries or bananas or whatever you're averaging, it's the same problem. If you know it, you know it. If you don't know it, you don't know it. That's why you should know the structure. It's more like a running total structure. How do you do that? It's have a counting loop with a 3 element of a loop: initialize, test, and update. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and go back to the presentation, and we're going to do some example on that. But let's go back to loops in here. So we're going to talk more about the structure of loops, right? Very important. Programming, many people confuse programming with knowing how to use a programming language. It is not the same thing, all right? You can know how to use a programming language, and you can be a lousy programmer. And you may not know how to use a programming language, and you may have ability to become an excellent programmer. Programming is how to know how to solve problem, how to know algorithm. This is an example what I showed you of an algorithm, how you compute the running total. Either you know it or you don't know it. If you know it, you are a good programmer because you know how to solve problem. Knowing how to use Visual Basic is not going to help you with this thing if you don't know it, right? Knowing this thing, then you can program it, whether it's Visual Basic or C++ or Java or any other language. You'll be able to program it because you know the approach, how you're going to solve it, right? So it's very important with programming. You have always to know the algorithm. How do you solve this problem? And you have to know, contrary to belief is that, oh, you don't have to memorize things in the computer sciences, you just be smart. No, you have to memorize things. You have to memorize common structure, how you do averages, how do you do totals, how do you sort an array, how you sort a list of numbers. You have to know these structures. You have to memorize lots of structure, common ones, to be able to do that. Right, anyway, let's go back to the mechanical part of programming. How do you do loops in Visual Basic? We're going to talk about the do-while loop, right? So Visual Basic provide repetition structure or loop that allow you to repeat one or more statement many times. Each repetition of the loop is called an iteration. Sometimes that's why sometimes we call them loops, or we call them iterative structures, right? They are basically support 3 types of loops: a do-while loop, a do-until loop, and a for next loop, right? Do you really need all 3 of them? Not really. Can you solve all the problem with just a do-while loop that we just covered? Yes. You can solve any looping problem with just a do-while loop. You don't need all 3 loops. One is good enough, right? So don't let this confuse you that there's too many loops to know. If you know how to do it with a do-while loop, the other you can use. Now, what's the difference between them? It's like looking at a glass. It's half full or half empty, right? The do-while use a positive logic. While the condition is true, repeat the loop. The do until use negative logic. While the condition is false, repeat the loop. So you repeat the loop until a condition becomes true. So until basically, you repeat while it is false. So it use opposite logic. This is the difference between the two. They use opposite logic. Do you really need that? Not really. You can just do everything with a do-while. You don't need do until, right? But this is there. Now, for loop is not needed, but it's useful. For loop is very useful because it's excellent for counting problem. And most of the problem we're doing are going to be counting problem. Actually, all the problems we're going to do in this class are going to be counting problem. So for next loop is useful for counting problems. So even so you don't need to use it, it can simplify things. What the for next does it combined the 3 elements of a counting loop in one statement. So it combined the initialize part, test part, and update part in one single statement. So it's useful because you put it in one statement instead of having 3 statements for it. So it's useful to have. Okay, but we'll talk about it when we get to it. Right. What are loops? Okay, what loops are basically you can draw a flow chart to logically see what a loop does. It is basically you have a diamond, a decision block, where you check is a condition true. If the condition is true, you do a process, and then you check the condition again. Again, if the condition is true, you do the process again, and you keep on doing the same process until the condition becomes false. When the condition becomes false, you exit. So it have these elements. It have basically an expression that you test. If the expression is true, you evaluate the statement. If it is false, you exit the loop. This is basically what a do while loop is. So what you have in here is an example. You initialize the count to 0. Always you have 3 elements in loop. You initialize, and usually you initialize to 0. So in here we initialize the count to 0. You test the counter. Is counter less than 10? And then at the end of the loop, you update the counter. And inside the loop, you do the processing. In this case, the processing is just adding hello to a list box, right? Now, because the upper limit is 10 in here, it's going to display hello 10 times, right? Because you're starting at 0. So you're going to say hello 10 times. If you want to display hello 5 times, you change the 10 in here to 5. This is a counting structure. So always you're gonna counting loop structures. Always you're gonna use something like that. Always start the count from 0 and then put the upper limit. How many times you wanna repeat? Everything is important in here, right? What would happen if I remove the count? If this one is removed, what would happen? Let's go ahead and do the tracing table, the example that we just did. If I do remove one of the step, let's say I removed this one. If I take this one out, all right, let's say I take this one. I'll say, I just only initialize that test would be enough. You don't need to update. It's just only, you don't need that. Okay, let's see what would happen. So we're gonna remove these things out and see what we're gonna get. So we're gonna just start. Initialize the count to 0, it's 0. Is 0 less than 5? It is true, right? Then you repeat. But the count is still 0. It's still true. So you put hello again, right? And then you repeat. The count is still 0. The count is not changing. When does it stop? Keep on going. Does it ever stop? No. It's going to remain 0 because you're not updating. You don't have the update step to change the count, right? So it's like you have in here, you have the count is at 0 and you want it to be at 10 to stop. It has to go, it has to move this way to go, to stop. But it's staying in place. Staying in place is not moving anywhere, right? So the loop is never gonna end because it doesn't reach the final value. So it never ends, right? So this is an example of what we call an infinite loop. An infinite loop is a loop that never stops. It keep on going and going and going and going and never stop. So this would be an infinite loop. So the update part is important because if you forget it, you're gonna have an infinite loop. And guess what's gonna happen when you run it? It's gonna keep on displaying hello, 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 and it's never gonna stop, right? So just to keep that in mind. If this has happened to you, there's a stop button on your Visual Studio, the red button, more like a tape recorder stop button. Click on it to stop it, and then you can exit from it. So keep that in mind, because if you get stuck in an infinite loop, you would need that. But it's called an infinite loop. So this is important. All 3 steps is important. Initializing, testing and update. You need to have that 3 element of a loop. This is what this is saying in here. A loop must have some way to end itself, to terminate, right? Something within the body of the loop must eventually force the test expression to become false, right? This is incrementing the counter. Every time you add 1 to the counter, it gets closer to the 10. So you start at 0, then become 1, then become 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and you're getting closer and closer to 10. When it hit 10, it stopped. In the previous example, the loop continued to repeat. Int count increases by 1 for each repetition. Finally, int count is going to reach 10. When it reaches 10, the loop will stop. Now, if you don't put the increment stop, if the test expression never be, if you don't increment the count, then you're never going to reach 10, and you're going to have what we call an infinite loop. So the loop will never stop. So that's why it's important to do that. Common things you do with loops is you need the counter. When you have a counting loop, you need the counter, definitely. A counter is a variable that is regularly incremented or decremented. What's incremented mean is adding 1 to the counter. What's decremented mean is subtracting 1 from a counter. So increment mean add 1 to the counter value. You can do that by saying int count equal int x equal int x plus 1, or by saying int x plus equal 1. I like this one because it's an abbreviated one. It's just and it's clear that you're adding 1 to the counter, and that's what I use in my code. Decrementing is reducing 1 from the counter. You can implement using int x equal int x minus 1, or by saying int x minus equal 1. I like to use this short notation also. So if you want to decrement, use minus equal. If you want to increment, use plus equal. Usually the counter you start at 0, right? You can start, if you like, the counter at 1, but if you start at 1, you know it's not recommended, because if you're going to be using the counter later on to access a list box, then they're gonna be, the index is not gonna match the index, because the index of a list box start at 0, not at 1. So it's always a good idea to start the index at 0. To increment the counter, you add 1, int count plus 1, and you test the counter by checking if int count less than 10, for example, the final value. Here's an example in here, right? Not an example, running total. We talk about that. This is the structure I just gave you. Many programming tasks require you to calculate total of a series or number. For example, computing the total sales, or computing the total scores, or computing the average sales, or computing the average scores. These are running total problems. This calculation generally requires 2 elements. It requires a loop. It's called a running total loop, right? A loop that read each number in the series, accumulate the total to create that we call a running total, and you need a variable to store this total. This variable we call an accumulator. So you need 2 things. So again, looking at the example that we did, or the thing we did. So in here, this is a running total loop, right? This is the accumulator. DBL total is the accumulator, right? And then basically in the running total loop, we read the next value, add it to the total. Read the next value, add it to the total. Read the next value, add it to the total. We do the reading using input box in this case. But you have to use input box in this case because you're not going to be able to use text boxes, right? Because you don't know how many students you have, how many items you have. You may have 5 items, you may have 10 items, you may have 100 items. You're not going to put 100 text boxes in your form. So you cannot use text boxes, you have to use input boxes for that. All right, that's why you're going to have this pop-up window when you use this example. Right. So this is a running total example. How you solve a running total. Let's go ahead and run right there. This is a flowchart of a running total. You need an accumulator in here. This is a total variable, DBL total. First set it to 0. In the loop, you check if there's another number you want to read. If there's another number you want to read, you read the number, add it to the total, and then check if there's another number. If there is, read the number, add it to the total. Read the number, add it to the total. This is exactly what we're doing in here. Read the number, add it to the total. Read the number, add it to the total. That's all what it is. There's two statements in here, basically. Get the number, add it to the total. And of course, you need to have the counter, so you need to increment the counter to go to the next iteration. Right? That's all what it is. Should you memorize that? Sure. It's not difficult. You can memorize it. And once you do that, you'll be able to solve average problem. And guess what? If you take a C++ class in the future, you're going to see this problem again. So you may as well know it now. Here's an example. When I do test average, common saying is averaging test, but you're not limited to averaging test. You can average sales, you can average rainfall, you can average anything you want to average. So it's the same problem, nothing different. There's no difference whatsoever, right? So the idea in here, I want to write a Visual Basic, and sometimes students may get scared by the problem, saying, oh, there's averaging 5 students and there is whatever. If you know how to do the average, it doesn't matter. It's the same problem, right? You'll be able to solve it using what I gave you. So write a Visual Basic application that uses input boxes to prompt the user to enter the number of students taking a test, and then the tests for each student. Your program should compute and display in a dialog box the average score for the test. For example, if the input is 5, and the test score is 90, 80, 70, 60, and 50, the average should be computed as 70 and display that, right? So we're gonna do it first with message boxes and input boxes. Later on, we're gonna use list boxes, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and start a new project. And this one, we're done with this one. I'm gonna save that, close it. And I'm gonna create a new project. And we're gonna do Visual Basic project. I'm gonna put it on the same folder for the chapter 5 folder. Right, I'm gonna call this one test average or test average. Let's see, select folder. Okay, first this one is not the name. Let's cut this one. Select folder. Call this one test average. Okay, so remember, every solution is a folder in Visual Basic. So when you create a project, you're creating a folder. So this is it. This is the thing. Let's change the title of this one. Call it test average. And let's put in here what we need, we're gonna put in here is we're gonna display, we're just gonna put a button, that's all. There's gonna be input boxes and message boxes. So we're gonna just say in here, put a button. And we're gonna say calculate. Later on, we'll add a list box, but for now, let's just limit it to just a button. Right, so I'm gonna program it. So that, let's rename it first. It's gonna be PTN calculate. And I want to program it. Guess what? It's gonna look very close to this thing. It's gonna look very much like this one. So if you know this stuff, you can write your program. You have to declare a counter, you have to declare the number of items, you have to declare an accumulator total, you have to declare the next value, which is a score in this case, because you're averaging scores. So you can change the name in here to call it DBL score, because that's what you're reading. And you can need DBL average. This is what you need. You declare 5 variables. Let's go and declare them. So in here we have them. We need in here end count as integer. We need to have the number of item. You can call it number of item or can get it in here number of tests. So you can change a little bit the name. Instead of saying number of item, called number of tests, because we're averaging tests, if you like. Then we're gonna have in here an accumulator, right? So we're gonna have, so when I read the next values, so we're gonna say DBL value. Instead of DBL value, we can say DBL test. We're gonna read the test score. We need an accumulator, DBL total. And we need to compute the average. So we need DBL average. So we have that. And we need to ask, the first thing is prompt for number of tests to average. So this is, we use input box. And we can read that into the variable int number of tests. I convert that to a integer. We use input box. And we can just do say message, how many tests. Right, so we read that. So we have that. We're ready to start the loop. So initialize counter and accumulator. Yeah, this is the end count. It's going to be set to 0. And the DBL total is going to be set to 0. So we do that. Okay. I could have just done them in here. I could have set equal to 0 in here if you want. And I could have set in here equal to 0 in here if you want. You can do it like that. And then you don't have to put this part. Okay. But I just want to emphasize that you need to set them to 0. Right. So I'm just taking that out. Right. So we do that. Then we start the loop. Do while. Right. And the condition is basically while end count, the counter, all right, less than the final value, which is end number of tests. Right. Okay, 2 things. You look in here. It's not complicated. 2 things you do in the loop. Read the next number, add it to the total. Read the next value number, add it to the total. That's what we're going to do in here. So when I say in here, DBL score test, we're going to read the next test, right? DBL test equal CDBL. And we're going to convert that. We're going to input data from an input box. And say in here, enter test score. So we're going to read the test score. and then add that to the total, dbl total plus equal, that means add dbl test. And since it's a counting problem, we need to increment the counter at the end of the loop. End count plus equal 1. When we exit the loop, we have the total. To compute the average, simply divide the total by the count. INT, number of tests. Give you the average, and then we can display the average using a message box. Average is, and we concatenate that with dbl average, and then we convert that to string. Maybe we're going to format it as a number, numeric value without $sign, of course, not currency. So we can do that. So this is basically the running total. It is basically, if you know this stuff, it's a piece of cake, right? So you just very mechanical to do, right? So we have that. Let's go ahead and run it, see how it works. So I'll go ahead and run it. I want to start with an easy number. I want to start with only two test scores. And then we're gonna then try 4 test score to see if it works. It's a good idea always to try something that's easy to calculate, so you can calculate it, and then see if it's correct. So I want to click on calculate. How many test scores? Let's say 2 in here. Let's say the first one is 70. Second one is 80. The average should be 85. So it's going to give me average 75. Sorry, it's average 75. So it's working okay. And you can try now. Say okay. You can try it again, but now try 4 test score. So I'll say in here 60, 70, 80, and 90. And get to average 75 also. It happens 75. Okay, so this is basically where it is. So okay in here, and let's close this one. So it's very simple, nothing much. But it doesn't look very professional. Right? This pop-up window form just have only one button. It doesn't look good, right? Is there a better way to present that? And the answer, yes, you can use list boxes. This is why we covered them, because it allows you to display multiple items. So I'm going to go ahead and add a list box. But first, I'm going to go ahead and increase the font because it's kind of small. So I want to select the font property and change that to 12. We're getting near the end of the lecture. Let me go ahead and do that. I want to add a list box. And here it is. This is where we're going to put the output. As I'm using message boxes, I want to put the output in a list box. You can make it as big as you want. So you can generate a report if you like in here. You can have as simple output, or you can have as big as a complex report. I'll call this one LSC output. So we have that. Now I want to put the output in here. So let's go back to the code window and see how we're going to do that. Right? I can, if I want, instead of a message box that show, I can just simply say LST output dot items dot add. I can add it as an item, and it's going to go into a list box. So if I run it right now, the output is going to go into the list box. Okay. But I don't want to just display only the average. I want to display the test score that the user entered. I want to display more a nicer report. And I can do that. I can add as many items as I want by doing LST output item add. Let's go ahead and say calculate. Let's say in here 2 test scored. And let's say in here 10. Well, not a good number, but say in here 70 and 80. And it is going to give you average 75. But if I want, I can display also the scores 70 and 80 to see how that came up with this number. You can do that inside the loop. Inside the loop, after you read the test score, you can say, if you like, LST output. Dot items dot add. I can add in here maybe test score. I can combine that in here with DBL test, and then say that toString. I can format it with 2 decimal point also. I don't know what. Maybe I just say n. Okay. I can format that. And again, this is test score. And just when I exit, before I display the output, maybe I can put a blank line by doing LST output dot items dot add. And I can add maybe a blank. Just display blank line, so it separates the total from this thing. And if you run it now, it's going to create a nicer report because it's going to show you the test score, it's going to show you the average. And there are going to be lines separating them. So you can use LST items add to do that, to create this kind of report, right? All right, this kind of system is a little bit slow. All right, so if I do calculate in here, let's put in here 2 items. Let's put 80 and 90. Now it show you in here the test scores, 80 and 90, and the average. If you like, you can add, instead of saying test score, you can say test score 1, test score 2. You can put numbers there. So to indicate this is the first exam, the second exam, etc. Yeah, how you do that? It's simple actually. You can simply in here, instead of just saying test score and display the test score, you can display, concatenate that with just first with test score, and then concatenate that with a counter and count, but add 1 to the counter because you're counting from 0. So the first 0 is the first exam. So you need to add 1, so display 1 instead of 0. And then you say dot toString. And format that as, you don't need to format just a single number. And then combine that with maybe a colon. And then combine that with the test value. So it's going to say in here test 1 colon and then the value. Let's see how this works. Okay. All right, so just gonna be just take a minute. We're almost there. All right, so let's go ahead and run it. So in here, let's say that you have 70. Oh, sorry, I put 70. No, I'm not gonna do that. It's gonna be lots of score in here to do. I enter 70 instead of 3 test scores. Right, so calculate, let's put 3 test scores. Put 70, 80, 90. Here it is, it's going to tell you test score 1 is 70, test score 2 is 80, test score 3 is 90, the average is 80. You get a nice report. So this is the advantage using listbox. You can produce as big as a report as you want. And if you have too many lines, you have a scroll bar. You can scroll through it. So you'll be able to get that. This is what we're going to talk about today. I will continue with chapter 5 next week. I know that Monday is a holiday, but we do have a lecture on June 1st. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record a lecture before Monday or on Monday, and then you'll be able to reference it, view it, and then on Wednesday, next Wednesday, please read the video that I'm going to leave. So I'm going to post on the class website the lecture for continuation lecture for chapter 5 is going to be posted where I post them every week, every day. So if you look at the class website, at the beginning of the class website, there's a Zoom section, and this is where I put all the lecture. So so right now, there's chapter 5. If you click on chapter 5, you see that what I posted on Monday, right? I want to post what I lectured today, so you can see part 2 in here. But also I want to do part 3 this week. So on Monday, so you can, if you want to view part 2, you can view it later on today. And later on this week, you're going to see part 3. So read part 3 before you come to the lecture, to the class next meeting, which is on Wednesday. So Wednesday, we're going to start with part 4. So keep that in mind. So read that chapter in here, and then we'll finish everything on the next meeting. So this way, on June 1st, I'll be available to answer question instead of doing lecture, because I know that everybody have an exam on June 2nd, and I don't want to lecture really on June 1st. It will not be fair to you and having an exam on the following day. Right. So keep it in mind. By the end of this week, you're going to see three parts in here. Today, I'm going to add. Later on today, I'm going to add part 2, that what we just did, and later this week, I want to add part 3. So by the end of this week, you should see 3 parts in here. Make sure you read all 3. You do all 3 parts before we get to the next meeting next week, next Wednesday. All right. Have a nice week, and if you have any questions, I do have office hours on Saturday. Between 11 and 12. Notice there's no office hours on Monday because it's a holiday. You have a nice day and enjoy the long weekend for you, right? I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording, and then I'll take any question that you may have.